So probably that's we think that you're trying to explain to us what is the situation in London in relation in terms of homelessness and how things have changed over time. How would you describe the situation of homelessness in London today?
So 1 in 52 people in London are homeless, and the statistics are kind of everything and nothing. It's very political, as it is everywhere, but you know, there's big questions about how it's reported and what it means. Really, those statistics we talk about are only 60% of the problem. So there's another 40% which is not reported. So it's what you see on the street and what the person with the clipboard can count on a night out.
Yeah.
It doesn't cover people sleeping on sofas, people, you know, sleeping in their cars, you know, that moment before, which is a very important moment. So the numbers are shocking and speak for themselves, but actually are only part of it. And I think, you know, it's changed dramatically. It kind of got better, and then it's probably got a bit worse in the pandemic, and hopefully it's now starting to get a little bit better again, but it's still huge, and you know, a massive issue that is not being addressed quickly enough.
And has the pandemic had any consequences on the situation? We've read about people living in shacks in the gardens and that sort of things. Do you have any precise, or do you know what happens with the pandemics, and what sort of change did you see?
Yeah, so I think, you know, issues like homelessness are very political, and the funding or the support that's provided depends on the political situation. So there's kind of positive and negative impact on the pandemic. On the positive side, the government were forced to address homelessness because of the pandemic. Rough sleeping had to be dealt with, and we'll probably speak to this later, but the Everybody In scheme meant that the government paid, I think it was £700 million of funding to address this issue, and hotels opened their doors and essentially eliminated rough sleeping, or 96% of rough sleeping overnight. So that is literally unprecedented, and just shows that when policy shifts even a little bit, you can make dramatic changes. But it was only for 3 months, so you know, it resolves an issue, but does it really? And on the other side of it, that diverted funding meant other issues elsewhere became more problematic. So youth homelessness, which we spoke about earlier, has risen 40% in the last 5 years. And it, you know, often these things are kind of relating to the statistics that we see, or that are the important political ones at the time. And it's that, you know, yes, it's great. We've kind of resolved one issue and proved we can do it, and we understand more about the homeless issues. But as a wider picture, many things have got much more dangerous and problematic. So
it sounds like shifting money around, which is not unusual in this country as well. Could you just, for our audience, say a little bit more about who is in charge of what? Meaning, you mentioned the government. We know that the City of London and the mayor has taken some stand. Who is in charge of dealing or preventing homelessness in London?
It's a difficult question.
Sorry.
So I'll start with a piece of legislation, because it changed everything actually. So in 2017, a new piece of policy came out, which is called the Homelessness Reduction Act. And what that did, because historically and not very long ago, it was illegal to be homeless, which sounds completely Victorian almost, but that was the case in 2017, right? In 2017, this Homelessness Reduction Act put the onus on councils, boroughs, you know, boroughs within London, to house or provide accommodation for anyone that was considered to be statutorily homeless. So that in itself is complicated, because it misses many demographics of homeless people. But there was suddenly a legal obligation, which was not on the homeless person, but on a person at risk of homelessness, but on the councils to address that issue. So it sits with the boroughs, but there's overarching policy within the Greater London Authority, which is very high level, but says, you know, you have a responsibility, and the two could be much better joined up and much more targeted. I think they could be.
Well, don't worry, you know, this issue of coordination between local authorities and central government has never arose in France. You know, we never had this sort of problems. I can tell you that. Okay, thank you. That gives an idea, but you emphasize indeed both the resources, the central government, and the legal dimension, and that's an important point. Maybe the last questions on the profile that is interesting people. So you define, as you mentioned, the sort of homelessness, the homeless which are being structural homeless in a way for a long time, the work-ready homeless, and the young homeless. These are the three categories you are using. Among them, would you say a little bit more about the proportion of men and women, of migrants, of foreigners? Can you tell us a little bit more about this population in the case of London?
Yes, so I think it's difficult. It's difficult because it's always changing, and I'm always a bit nervous to kind of categorize things in that way. But I think if you take work-ready homeless, because that group are people that have often no recourse to public funds, it's often a high proportion of maybe people from different cultural backgrounds. So I think this is a statistic I vaguely remember, but I think something like 42% was from kind of Eastern European countries, for example. I'm sure that's now changing even more so.
Yeah.
And with youth homelessness, I think it tends to be a higher proportion of men, younger men, but and actually in youth homeless it tends to be kind of a higher proportion from a UK background, but obviously that again changes based on kind of political climate and what's happening. And entrenched rough sleepers is very varied, because you know that's people that have been homeless for over 10 years. That's much more mixed, I think. But yeah, it is so changeable, you know, even month by month.